Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Eli, 38. I've been married to Jen for almost 11 years now. We have no kids, but I thought we were building something solid, a life we could both be proud of. I work as a construction manager, and I've always been the steady, dependable guy. My job isn't glamorous, but it keeps the bills paid and lets us live comfortably. Jen, on the other hand, has this flair for socializing. She's a real people person, always laughing, hosting dinners, and keeping everyone entertained. I loved that about her. She was the bright spot in any room, and I thought I was lucky to have her. Things started to feel off about a year ago. At first, it was little stuff, you know? She'd start dressing up more than usual, even on random weekdays. She started coming home late, saying it was work events or networking dinners. She was always on her phone, laughing at texts and quickly putting it down when I walked by. I chalked it up to her just being busy. She worked in marketing, so I figured that's just how it is. But then came the excuses. I'd suggest we do something, and she'd claim she was too tired or already made plans with the girls. I brushed it off, didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. Then came Maya. She's a young woman, mid-20s, who showed up at my office one afternoon. At first, I thought she had the wrong guy, but she introduced herself and asked to talk privately. She looked serious, almost nervous. I couldn't figure out what this stranger wanted, but something about her tone made me listen. What she told me hit like a sledgehammer to the gut. Maya is the estranged daughter of Cliff Sterling, this big-shot businessman in town who's been making waves in real estate. Turns out, she had every reason to hate her dad. Cliff had cheated on her mom and wrecked their family. But that's not why she came to me. Maya wanted to warn me about Jen. She claimed Jen and Cliff were having an affair. I didn't believe her. I mean, sure, my marriage wasn't perfect, but Jen cheating? No way. Maya said she had proof. She handed me a folder, full of photos and texts. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. There were pictures of Jen and Cliff at a fancy hotel, smiling, holding hands, even kissing. The texts were worse, intimate, flirty messages back and forth, making plans to meet up. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. I kept flipping through the pages, hoping it was some kind of sick prank, but it wasn't. Maya sat there quietly while I read, and when I looked up she said, "I'm sorry, Eli. I know how much this hurts. But they both deserve to pay for what they've done." I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to feel. Betrayed? Angry? Humiliated? All of it, I guess. But more than anything, I felt like a fool. A blind, trusting fool. That night, I didn't confront Jen. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. Instead, I stayed up late, sitting in the dark, staring at those photos, trying to piece together where I went wrong, how I didn't see the signs. And then I made a decision. If what Maya said was true, if Jen and Cliff thought they could play me for a fool, they had another thing coming. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. Not until I had a plan. Because I wasn't just going to sit back and let them get away with this. After that meeting with Maya, my head was spinning. I still didn't know if I could trust her. Who just shows up out of nowhere to tell you your wife is cheating? But the evidence in that folder, it wasn't something you could fake. The timestamps on the photos and messages matched up with Jen's work events. And the worst part? I recognized the dress she was wearing in one of the pictures. She'd worn it to celebrate a client's promotion. I even complimented her on how beautiful she looked that night. I decided I wasn't going to make any rash moves. If this was real, I needed more than just Maya's word. I needed my own proof. The next day, I started paying closer attention. Jen was always careful with her phone, keeping it face down on the table or taking it with her into the bathroom. But one evening, she left it charging in the kitchen while she was upstairs. My heart was pounding as I picked it up. I didn't have her passcode, but I noticed she'd left her notifications on. Sure enough, there it was, a message from CS. It said, "Miss you already. Can't wait for Thursday," winky face, my stomach churned. CS. Cliff Sterling. I put the phone down before Jen could notice and tried to act normal the rest of the night, but every word out of her mouth felt like a lie. She told me about her day, asked about mine, and kissed me goodnight like nothing was wrong. It was infuriating. The next few days, I started putting my plan into motion. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I called my best friend, Luke. Luke and I have been through thick and thin, college roommates, co-workers for a while, and basically like a brother to me. If there was anyone I could trust, it was him. When I told him what was going on, he didn't even hesitate. Eli, we're gonna get to the bottom of this. And if she's cheating? You let me know how far you want to take it, and I'll back you up. We started digging. First, I installed a GPS tracker on Jen's car. I didn't like doing it, but I had to know the truth. Then, Luke helped me set up a hidden camera in our home office, where Jen would often take her client calls. The first big break came just 2 days later. The tracker showed Jen's car parked outside a hotel on the other side of town. I drove there, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. Sure enough, I saw her walking out of the lobby with Cliff. They didn't even try to hide it, they were laughing, and he had his hand on the small of her back. It was like they didn't care who saw them. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I just took pictures from my truck and waited for her to come home. When she did, she acted like everything was normal. She even smiled and said, "I hope you didn't miss me too much today." The nerve. That night, I reviewed the footage from the hidden camera. Sure enough, Jen had taken a call earlier that day with Cliff. Their conversation was sickening. She was laughing, flirting, and talking about how excited she was to see him later. She even mentioned me, saying, "Don't worry about Eli. He's so busy with work, he doesn't even notice." It was like a knife to the heart. The next morning, I met with Maya again. I wanted to know why she was doing this, why she'd come to me in the first place. She told me about her mom, how Cliff had manipulated and cheated on her until she was a shell of the woman she used to be. "He ruins lives, Eli," she said. "And I'm not going to let him do it again. Not to you." Maya wasn't just bitter, she was determined. And I realized I was too. Jen and Cliff had made their choices, and now it was my turn. I wasn't going to just sit around and wallow in self-pity. I was going to hit back. Hard. After my meeting with Maya, I was done playing the fool. If Jen and Cliff wanted to gamble with my life, they were about to learn the stakes. But I needed to play this carefully. A head-on confrontation wouldn't cut it. I wanted to take my time, make them feel the cracks forming beneath their feet before everything came crashing down. The first thing I did was start gathering more evidence. The pictures I had were good, but I needed something indisputable, something that would leave no room for lies or manipulation. With Luke's help, I started documenting everything. The GPS logs from Jen's car, her phone notifications when I could catch them, and even the time she claimed to be working late. I also started dropping little hints to see if she'd slip up. One night over dinner, I casually mentioned Cliff. "Didn't you say you met him at that networking event last year?" I asked. Her fork froze mid-air for a second before she quickly recovered. "Yeah, he was there." "Why?" she said, forcing a smile. "Just curious." "I heard his name come up at work the other day," I replied, pretending not to notice how tense she'd gotten. That confirmed it. She was hiding something. The real breakthrough came the following week. Luke had suggested we use a voice recorder in the office instead of just relying on the hidden camera. It was a smart move. That day, Jen had another call with Cliff. And this time, it wasn't just flirting. They talked about me. She laughed as she told him, "Eli's so predictable. He's stuck in his routine, work, dinner, bed. I almost feel bad about it sometimes." Almost. Cliff's voice was cocky and smug. "Don't waste energy on guilt, babe. He's just a stepping stone for you. We've got bigger plans, remember?" Stepping stone? Bigger plans? I clenched my fists so hard I thought I might break something. But I forced myself to stay calm. I had to see this through. The next part of my plan involved exposing them. I wasn't ready to go nuclear yet. I wanted to watch them squirm first. So I decided to play along, act like the oblivious husband while subtly turning up the pressure. The perfect opportunity came when Jen told me she'd be out late for another client meeting. I said nothing, just smiled and kissed her goodbye like always. Then I followed her. The tracker led me to a fancy restaurant downtown, where I watched her and Cliff share a cozy romantic dinner. Instead of confronting them, I took pictures and sent one to Maya. She replied instantly, "Let me know when you're ready to make your move." The next day, I started seeding doubts in Jen's mind. "Hey," I said casually as we ate breakfast. "You've been working so hard lately. Are you sure you're not overdoing it? You seem distracted. Her eyes darted to me for a second before she smiled. No, I'm fine. Just a lot on my plate right now. You know how it is. Yeah, I replied, keeping my tone light. But if there's ever anything you want to talk about, I'm here. Always. I saw the flicker of guilt cross her face, but she quickly buried it. That was the first crack. Meanwhile, I kept digging into Cliff. With Maya's help, I learned more about his business dealings. The guy wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was shady as hell. There were rumors about bribery, fraudulent contracts, and mistreated employees. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became that Cliff's empire was built on lies. Maya had connections in the real estate world, and together we started piecing together a plan to not only expose the affair but also dismantle his career. As much as I hated Jen for what she'd done, Cliff was the mastermind, the one pulling the strings. He had to go down first. Step by step, I was getting closer to pulling the rug out from under them. They had no idea what was coming. By this point, I was a man with a mission. Every day was a balancing act between pretending everything was normal with Jen and coordinating with Maya and Luke behind the scenes. It wasn't easy, but the anger, kept me sharp. I wasn't just going to let them get away with this. Maya and I started small. She introduced me to a couple of her contacts in the real estate world, people who had grudges against Cliff. Turns out, he wasn't just a cheat in his personal life, he had a reputation for playing dirty in business too. Cutting corners on construction, underpaying contractors, and sweet-talking investors into risky deals while pocketing fat commissions for himself. One of those investors was an older guy named Mr. Patel. He'd lost a huge chunk of his retirement savings thanks to one of Cliff's too-good-to-be-true schemes. Maya and I met him at a coffee shop, and he was all too happy to share what he knew. He handed over emails and documents proving Cliff had knowingly sold him a bad property deal. "I'll testify if it comes to that," Mr. Patel said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. Armed with this information, I contacted an investigative journalist Maya knew. Her name was Rachel, and she was as relentless as they come. She wasn't just interested in Cliff's shady deals, she wanted the full story, including his affair with Jen. At first, I wasn't sure about airing my dirty laundry in public, but Rachel convinced me. This isn't just about your marriage, Eli. It's about exposing a man who's been ruining lives for years. Rachel got to work right away, digging through the documents and setting up interviews with other victims of Cliff's schemes. Meanwhile, I kept gathering evidence on Jen and Cliff's relationship. The more I saw, the more disgusted I became. They were careless, arrogant, and so sure they'd never be caught. The first blow came about 2 weeks later. Rachel published an article titled, "The Empire of Lies: Inside Cliff Sterling's Real Estate Scandals." It was a bombshell. She detailed everything, the fraud, the manipulation, and even hinted at his affair with a married woman. While the article didn't name Jen directly, anyone who knew Cliff well enough could probably connect the dots. The fallout was immediate. Social media exploded with outrage, and several of Cliff's investors started pulling out of his projects. Maya told me she'd heard from one of her contacts that Cliff was scrambling to do damage control, holding emergency meetings and firing off angry emails. That night, Jen came home looking rattled. I didn't say anything about the article, just watched as she avoided eye contact and went straight to the shower. When she came out, she asked, "Did you hear about that story going around about Cliff Sterling?" "Yeah, I saw something about it," I said casually, pretending not to care. "Crazy stuff." She nodded, biting her lip. "It's probably just a smear campaign. People are always out to get successful men." I almost laughed out loud. Successful men? Yeah, Cliff was successful at lying, cheating, and ruining lives. But I kept my cool and said, maybe. I guess we'll see how it plays out. The next day, I got a call from Rachel. "The story's gaining traction," she said. "And Cliff knows we're not done. If you're ready, we can take the next step." I knew what she meant. The next step was going public with the affair. It wasn't just about humiliating Jen and Cliff, it was about showing the world who they really were. But before I agreed, I needed to make sure I had everything lined up. There were still a few pieces of the puzzle missing. So I dug deeper. I checked the GPS tracker on Jen's car again and found she'd been making frequent trips to a private condo downtown. I followed her one afternoon, parking a few blocks away and watching as she entered the building. When she came out an hour later, Cliff was with her. They kissed before going their separate ways. I didn't just take pictures this time, I recorded the whole thing. I wanted there to be no doubt, no room for her to wiggle out of this with more lies. When I got home that night, Jen was already there, acting like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted chicken or pasta for dinner. I looked at her, smiling, and said, "You decide, babe. I trust you." She smiled back, completely oblivious. But trust? That was long gone. The moment I had been waiting for was here. I had everything: photos, recordings, GPS logs, and proof of the affair. I'd also armed Rachel, the journalist, with as much evidence as I could about Cliff's financial schemes. But exposing the affair wasn't just about hurting Jen and Cliff, it was about making a statement. They thought they could walk all over people, destroy lives, and come out clean. They were wrong. Rachel agreed to run the story with the affair as the centerpiece. She was thorough, ensuring every detail was backed up by evidence. The headline was ruthless: "Behind the Empire, the secrets of Cliff Sterling and his mistress." The article laid everything bare: the affair, the condo meetings, even snippets of their texts. It didn't name Jen directly but described her as a married woman who had betrayed her longtime husband for the allure of Sterling's wealth and power. The morning the story dropped, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching Jen scroll through her phone. I knew the second she saw it because her face went pale. She looked up at me, her voice shaking. "Eli, did you see this article?" I played dumb. "Which one?" She held out her phone, and I pretended to skim the headline, furrowing my brow. "Wow," I said, setting my mug down. "That's intense." Her hand trembled as she set her phone on the counter. "This is bad. Really bad." "Bad for who?" I asked, looking her straight in the eye. She froze. It was subtle, but I saw it, that flicker of fear, the realization that I knew. Before she could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Luke: "She's gonna crack. Stay cool." The fallout from the article was immediate and brutal. Cliff's reputation, already damaged from the financial scandals, took another massive hit. The combination of sleaze and corruption was too much for even his most loyal supporters. Investors dropped him, clients canceled contracts, and his business began to crumble. For Jen, the article was like a ticking time bomb. While her name wasn't mentioned, people started whispering. Friends who'd seen us together at events connected the dots, and I started getting texts from mutual acquaintances asking if I was okay. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to play the victim in public, yet. Jen, on the other hand, was spiraling. Over the next few days, I watched her try to hold things together, frantically texting on her phone and making calls behind closed doors. One night, I overheard her on the phone with Cliff. "What are we going to do?" she hissed. "This is all over the news." I recorded the conversation, every word of it. Cliff sounded calm, even dismissive. "It'll blow over," he said. "These things always do. Just keep your head down, and don't do anything stupid." But Jen wasn't as composed. "People are starting to figure out it's me. Eli's been acting weird. What if he knows?" I almost laughed out loud. If only she knew how much I knew. The turning point came a few days later. Jen came home late, her eyes red and puffy. She sat down at the table across from me, silent for a moment before finally speaking. "Eli, we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Okay. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, and for a second, I thought she might confess. But instead, she spun another lie. "There's been a lot of rumors going around about me, about Cliff. None of it's true." I raised an eyebrow. "None of it?" She nodded, avoiding eye contact. "People just love gossip. You know how it is." I couldn't hold back anymore. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You're lying, Jen. I know everything." Her face went white. What are you talking about?" I stood up, walked over to the counter, and picked up the folder Maya had given me, the one I'd added all my own evidence to. I dropped it in front of her. "Start there." She opened the folder, flipping through the photos, the texts, the GPS logs. With each page, her hand shook more, and her breathing grew heavier. By the time she reached the end, she was crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's not what it looks like." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't insult me by pretending this isn't exactly what it looks like." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. All I felt was relief. For the first time in weeks, the lies were out in the open, and I had the upper hand. Jen sat at the table, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I just watched her. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to see it, to see her realize the web of lies she'd spun had finally unraveled. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal she'd inflicted on me. "I can explain," she choked out, her voice trembling. "Explain what?" I asked, my tone sharp but controlled. "Explain how you lied to my face for months? How you let another man treat me like a fool while you played along?" She looked up, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that, Eli. It was complicated. Complicated." I laughed bitterly. "What's complicated about sneaking around with Cliff Sterling while telling me you're working late? You know what's not complicated? Honesty. Respect. Apparently, those were too much for you." She shook her head, reaching for my hand, but I pulled it back. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. It got out of hand. I was going to end it, but— "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "You're not going to sit here and try to twist this into some noble act of regret. You weren't going to end anything. I heard you on the phone with him, Jen. I've seen the texts. You didn't slip up. You made a choice." Over and over again. Her mouth opened like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She looked down at the folder, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay calm. "I loved you. And you threw it all away for what? A man like Cliff? A guy who cheats, lies, and uses people until they're no good to him anymore." "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it did." I stood up, pacing the room. "And now you're going to live with the consequences." The fallout hit fast. That evening, I packed a bag and left the house. Jen begged me to stay, promising she'd do anything to fix things, but I couldn't even look at her. I needed space to think, to breathe. I stayed with Luke for a few nights, and during that time, I started making moves to ensure Jen and Cliff wouldn't just walk away from this unscathed. First, I called Rachel, the journalist. "I'm ready to name names," I told her. She was thrilled, knowing the story would make an even bigger splash once Jen's identity was revealed. I didn't care about the embarrassment anymore. Jen and Cliff had made this mess, and they deserved to face it head-on. Next, I hired a lawyer to start divorce proceedings. I wanted no part of the life we'd built together, at least, not with her in it. The house, the joint accounts, everything. I was ready to walk away from it all if it meant cutting her out of my life. But I wasn't done with Cliff yet. Through Maya, I learned more about his business dealings, shady partnerships, fake invoices, and even a bribery scheme involving city officials. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. With Maya's help, we compiled the evidence and sent it anonymously to several regulatory agencies and Cliff's competitors. If he thought the article was bad, he was in for a rude awakening. A week later, the second article hit. This time, Rachel didn't hold back. She named Jen outright, describing her as the wife of a local construction manager and detailing how her affair with Cliff had come to light. The story was brutal but fair, sticking to the facts and painting a picture of two people who thought they were untouchable. Jen's phone started blowing up immediately. Friends, co-workers, and even family members called to ask what was going on. She tried to explain, but most of them didn't want to hear it. Word spread fast, and before long, she was the subject of whispered conversations everywhere she went. As for Cliff, the second wave of bad press hit him like a freight train. Investors fled in droves, lawsuits started piling up, and one of his major projects was shut down pending an investigation. He tried to put on a brave face, issuing a statement calling the allegations baseless, but no one bought it. His name was mud, and his empire was crumbling. Jen showed up at Luke's place one night, desperate to talk. "Please, Eli," she pleaded as I stood in the doorway. "I know I screwed up, but we can work through this. I love you, love." I said, my voice cold. "You don't even know what that word means." She broke down again, begging me to come home, but I was done. "You made your choice, Jen. Now you get to live with it." I shut the door, her sobs echoing in the hallway as I walked back inside. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't over yet, but the pieces were falling into place. After shutting the door on Jen, I stood in Luke's living room, staring at the floor. She was broken, sure, but so was I. The difference was, I didn't cause this mess, she did. Cliff did. And they were both going to see what it felt like to have the rug pulled out from under them. The days that followed were a whirlwind. My lawyer had already filed the divorce papers, and as much as it hurt to see my marriage officially dissolve, it also felt like a clean slate. Jen hadn't contested much, probably because she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. She tried reaching out a few times, leaving voicemails and texting long-winded apologies, but I didn't respond. I blocked her number and let my lawyer handle everything. Meanwhile, Cliff's empire was in freefall. Maya kept me updated on the chaos. His investors were suing him left and right, and regulators had opened a full-scale investigation into his business practices. Rachel's articles had sparked a flood of tips from people who'd been wronged by Cliff over the years, and the media wasn't letting up. The cherry on top. I'd anonymously sent the recordings of Cliff and Jen's conversations to several of his business rivals. Those recordings made their way into the hands of some well-connected people, and within days, Cliff was blacklisted in the real estate world. No one wanted to associate with him anymore. One night, Maya called me. "Eli," she said, her voice full of satisfaction, "he's done. Cliff's selling off his assets just to stay afloat. I even heard he put his house on the market." I couldn't help but smile. "Good," I said. "He deserves it." "And Jen?" she asked. "She's out of my life," I replied. "For good." Maya paused, then added, "I know it doesn't fix everything, but you did the right thing. People like Cliff, they don't stop unless someone stands up to them." "Yeah," I said, staring out Luke's kitchen window. "But it doesn't feel like a win." "Not yet." About a week later, I ran into Jen's sister, Katie, at the grocery store. Katie had always been one of the few people in Jen's family who I genuinely liked, and I could tell from her expression that she'd heard about everything. "Eli," she said hesitantly, "can we talk?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. "She's a mess," Katie said, jumping straight to the point. "She's staying with Mom and Dad, but they're furious with her. She lost her job because of the article, and people are treating her like a pariah. She's not eating, not sleeping. I don't even recognize her anymore." I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for Jen, but the other part, the part that remembered how she'd lied to my face while sneaking around with Cliff, felt nothing. "She made her choices," I said finally. "Now she has to live with them." Katie nodded, her face grim. "I don't blame you, Eli. She messed up. Big time. But if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me." The final blow to Cliff came a month later. Rachel published one last article, detailing the full extent of his downfall. It wasn't just his business that was gone, his personal life was in ruins too. His wife had filed for divorce, and his kids had cut ties with him. Even Maya admitted she felt a small pang of pity for him. But not me. I felt nothing for Cliff Sterling. He'd ruined lives for years, and now he was finally reaping what he'd sown. As for me, I started picking up the pieces of my life. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger projects and proving to myself that I could thrive without Jen. Luke and Maya became my rocks, supporting me through the darkest days and reminding me that I wasn't alone. One day, Maya said something that stuck with me. "Revenge feels good for a while, but healing feels better. You've done what you needed to do. Now it's time to move forward." She was right. The weight on my shoulders was lighter now, and I could see a path forward. A life without lies, betrayal, or toxic people dragging me down. After the storm settled, I realized something strange. My life was quiet. For the first time in what felt like forever, there were no secrets, no lies, no constant wondering about what Jen was doing or where she was. It wasn't peace exactly, not yet, but it was the start of something better. Work became my sanctuary. As a construction manager, I'd always prided myself on building things, and now I threw myself into the job with more focus than ever. It wasn't just about deadlines and blueprints anymore. Every project felt symbolic, like I was rebuilding myself brick by brick. My boss noticed the shift and offered me a promotion to oversee a major downtown project. It was the kind of opportunity I'd been waiting for, and I took it without hesitation. At home, I started making small changes too. I found a new apartment, something closer to the city, with big windows and lots of light. It felt like a fresh start, a space that was mine alone. I sold most of the furniture Jen and I had bought together and replaced it with things that suited me. It was amazing how much better I felt without those constant reminders of her. Maya and Luke became my closest confidants during this time. Luke, ever the loyal friend, made sure I didn't wallow. He dragged me out to watch sports, try new restaurants, and even hit the occasional bar. "You've been through hell, man," he'd say. "But you're not staying there. Not on my watch." Maya, on the other hand, brought a different energy. She had this calm determination about her, a kind of quiet strength that I admired. We'd meet up for coffee or lunch every now and then, and she'd talk about her plans to go back to school and study psychology. "I want to help people," she told me once. "People who've been hurt like my mom was. Like you were." Her words stuck with me. Maybe I wasn't the only one rebuilding. One day, about 3 months after the divorce papers were signed, I got a text from Jen's sister, Katie. It was short: "She wants to see you. Just once. For closure." At first, I didn't reply. What was the point? Jen had made her bed, and I had no interest in helping her feel better about lying in it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't about her. It was about me. Maybe I needed closure too. We met at a small park near her parents' house. Jen looked different, thinner, her face drawn and tired. She wore no makeup, and her usual confident posture was gone. For a moment, I didn't even recognize her. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, sitting down on the bench beside me. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Jen?" She hesitated, twisting her hands in her lap. I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I needed to tell you how sorry I am. You didn't deserve any of it." I listened in silence, letting her talk. She went on about how she'd lost herself, how she let Cliff manipulate her, and how she'd ruined the best thing in her life, our marriage. When she was done, I finally spoke. "Jen, I'm glad you're sorry. But this isn't something you can fix with an apology. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed the trust, the foundation of everything we built together. That's not something I can forgive." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." I stood up, looking down at her one last time. "I hope you figure out who you are, Jen. But I can't be part of that journey. Take care of yourself." As I walked away, I felt lighter, like I'd finally let go of the weight I'd been carrying for months. That night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights and thinking about everything I'd been through. I didn't feel victorious or triumphant, but I felt free. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. After meeting Jen in the park, it felt like the final chapter of that part of my life had been written. I didn't feel angry or bitter anymore, just ready to move forward. And life, as it turns out, was ready to meet me halfway. The downtown project I was managing started to gain attention. It was a high-profile development, one of those projects everyone in the industry was watching. I poured myself into it, treating every detail like it mattered. And it paid off. The project finished on time and under budget, and my company couldn't have been happier. They offered me a significant raise and put me in charge of multiple new projects across the city. For the first time in months, I felt like I was thriving. Work wasn't just a distraction anymore, it was something I was genuinely proud of. As I settled into my new life, my friendship with Maya deepened. We'd started as allies in a shared mission to take down Cliff, but over time, it became clear we had more in common than just that. She was smart, driven, and had a way of seeing the good in people, even after everything she'd been through. One evening, she invited me to dinner at her place. It wasn't anything fancy, just spaghetti and wine, but it felt comfortable, easy. We talked for hours about everything: her plans to go back to school, my work, the future we were both trying to build. At one point, she paused and looked at me with this soft smile. "You know," she said, "you've come a long way, Eli. I can see it. You're not the same guy I met in that office months ago." I smiled back, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "That's thanks to you," I admitted. "I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't walked into my life." Her cheeks turned a little pink, and she laughed. "Don't give me too much credit. You're the one who did the hard work." Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together. Lunches turned into dinners, and casual conversations turned into deep, personal ones. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other at their own pace. One night, as we were walking through the park after dinner, she stopped and turned to me. "Eli," she said, her voice hesitant. "Do you ever think about us? About what this could be?" I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of doubt. "I do," I said honestly. "But I don't want to rush into anything. I've still got a lot to figure out." She nodded, her expression soft. "Me too. But I just wanted you to know that I'm here. For whatever this turns into." Hearing that lifted a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. "Thanks, Maya. That means a lot." Meanwhile, Cliff was dealing with his own version of reality. From what I heard through Maya's contacts, he'd lost nearly everything. His business was gone, his reputation was in tatters, and even his closest allies had abandoned him. He'd moved out of his mansion and was living in a small rental property on the outskirts of town. Maya told me she'd considered visiting him, but ultimately decided against it. "He's not worth it," she said. "He's already lost everything that mattered to him. I don't need to twist the knife." I admired her strength. If anyone had a right to gloat, it was her, but she chose to rise above it. It inspired me to do the same. Life continued to move forward, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't defined by the betrayal or the anger anymore. I was building something new, professionally, personally, and maybe even romantically. And for the first time, I felt like I deserved it. Things with Maya unfolded naturally, like a slow burn that neither of us was in a rush to ignite. We kept seeing each other, lunches that turned into dinners, late-night conversations about everything and nothing. It felt easy, unforced, like we'd found something solid amidst all the chaos we'd both endured. One evening, after a long day at work, Maya showed up at my apartment with takeout and a movie. "You looked stressed the other day," she said with a small smile. "Figured you could use a break." We sat on the couch, eating and laughing as the movie played in the background. At some point, our hands brushed, and she didn't pull away. Neither did I. We didn't say anything, but the quiet spark between us was unmistakable. When she left that night, she hugged me at the door, lingering just long enough for it to feel like more than just a friendly gesture. "Good night, Eli," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "Good night, Maya," I replied, feeling something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Meanwhile, life was settling into a rhythm. Work was thriving, and my new apartment finally felt like home. I'd even reconnected with a few old friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly but surely, I was rediscovering who I was outside of the shadow of my failed marriage. Jen's name still came up occasionally, mutual acquaintances asking how I was doing or hinting at how much she'd struggled since the divorce. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet detachment. I'd made my peace with what happened, and I wasn't about to let her take up any more space in my life. Maya and I continued to grow closer, but we took things slow. One day, as we walked through the park where we first met, she slipped her hand into mine. It was such a small gesture, but it meant everything. "I think I'm finally ready," I told her, squeezing her hand gently. She smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Me too." It wasn't a grand declaration or a dramatic moment, just two people choosing to take a step forward together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Maya and I didn't define anything right away. It wasn't about labels or rushing into something just for the sake of it. We kept doing what felt right: dinners, long walks, and quiet nights talking about everything under the sun. One evening, she invited me over to celebrate her acceptance into a psychology program. She'd been working toward this for months, and seeing her light up as she talked about her plans made me feel proud in a way I hadn't expected. "You're doing amazing things, Maya," I told her. "I can't wait to see where this takes you." She smiled softly, tucking her hair behind her ear. "I wouldn't be here without you, you know. You've been my anchor." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It had been so long since anyone had made me feel like I mattered that much. I reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, resting her head on my shoulder as we sat in her small living room. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, no words needed. Life was steady. My work projects were thriving, and my days felt full in a way they hadn't in years. Luke and I still caught up regularly, and every time he saw me, he'd grin and say, "Man, you're a whole new person." He was right. I felt lighter, freer, and more focused on the future than the past. Even the mention of Jen no longer stirred any resentment or pain. She was part of a story I'd closed, a chapter one didn't need to reread. One night, as Maya and I walked back from dinner, she stopped me. "Eli," she said, her voice tentative. "Are we good? Like, is this okay for you?" I knew what she meant. We'd both been through so much that the idea of starting over came with its own kind of fear. "We're more than good," I told her. "I've never felt more sure about anything." Her smile was small but full of warmth. "Me too." And just like that, it felt like something unspoken between us had settled. We weren't just moving forward, we were moving forward together. Maya and I settled into a rhythm that felt effortless. There were no grand declarations, no forced milestones, just quiet, steady progress. It was the kind of relationship I hadn't realized I needed, one built on mutual respect and understanding rather than fleeting passion or illusion. One weekend, I invited her to a construction site I was overseeing. The project was a community center, something I was particularly proud of because it wasn't just about business, it was about creating something that mattered. Maya wandered through the partially finished building, her eyes lighting up as she imagined the possibilities. "This is incredible, Eli," she said, running her hand along a freshly installed railing. "You're literally building a place where people can come together. That's amazing." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd been focused on rebuilding myself that I hadn't fully appreciated how much of myself I was putting into my work. Seeing it through her eyes made me realize how far I'd come. That evening, over takeout at my apartment, we talked about our dreams. She told me about her plans to open a private practice one day, focusing on helping people navigate trauma and loss. I told her about my dream of starting my own construction firm, one that prioritized community projects over pure profit. "We'd make a good team," she joked, nudging my shoulder. "Yeah," I replied, smiling. "We would." As the weeks passed, our bond deepened. Maya became more than just someone I cared about. She became my partner in every sense of the word. She challenged me, supported me, and reminded me of what it felt like to be truly seen and valued. One night, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights, she leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "I'm glad we found each other, Eli." "Me too," I said, meaning every word. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And I had no intention of looking back.